The doors of the grand hall crash open before Elena Grant can steady her feet, and two guards drag her across the cold marble floor like she is nothing more than a sack of grain. Her bare feet scrape against the polished stone, and the sound echoes through a room filled with 300 of the most powerful men in the world. She does not scream. She does not beg. She simply lets her body go still, because she has learned, over many years, that stillness is the only shield a person like her is allowed to carry. The Grand Hall belongs to the Alpha Summit, a gathering held once every decade, where every ruling Alpha King from every territory comes together under one roof. Tonight, that roof is filled to the last seat. Golden chandeliers hang from the ceiling, throwing warm light across rows of carved wooden thrones, each one holding a man whose name alone can silence a room. And into the center of that room, barefoot and trembling, Elena is thrown. She lands hard on her knees. The impact sends a jolt of pain up through her legs, but she swallows it down, the same way she has swallowed down every hurt life has handed her since she was a child. She lifts her chin, instead of lowering it, and that single motion draws a ripple of whispers from the crowd. A woman who should be crying is not crying. A woman who should be crying is not crying. At the front of the hall, standing on a raised platform beside an empty throne meant for her, is the man she was supposed to marry in 3 days. Draven Ashford. Tall, golden-haired, dressed in a black coat lined with silver thread, he looks down at her the way a man might look at something he scraped off the bottom of his boot. There is no love left in his eyes. There was never much to begin with, only the appearance of it, carefully built for cameras and crowds and family expectations. "Look at her," Draven says, his voice carrying easily across the silent hall, kneeling where she belongs. Somewhere in the crowd, laughter starts. It is quiet at first, a ripple, then it grows louder, spreading from throne to throne, until the whole hall seems to hum with the sound of 300 powerful men, enjoying her humiliation. Elena keeps her eyes forward. She does not look for a friendly face, because she already knows there isn't one in this room, not tonight. 3 days ago, she had believed her life was finally about to change for the better. She had spent years in the shadow of the Ashford pack, first as a distant cousin taken in out of what looked like kindness, then slowly worked into the role of a future bride, a symbol the pack could use to strengthen an alliance with a smaller territory. She had never loved Draven. She had simply learned to survive beside him, the way she had learned to survive everything else. "She lied to all of us," Draven continues, pacing slowly in front of his throne, playing to the crowd like a performer who knows exactly how to hold an audience. "She told my father she came from a respected line. She told me her family had standing among the old packs. All lies. She is nothing. An Omega, with no pack, no name, no right to sit among us." The word Omega lands like a slap. In this world, it is the lowest rank a wolf can hold, a title given to those born without strength, without the ability to lead, without the respect that comes from bloodline and power. To call someone an Omega in front of 300 Alpha Kings is to strip them of dignity in the cruelest way this world allows. Elena still says nothing. Her silence is not weakness. It is discipline. Because the truth is, everything Draven is accusing her of is only half right, and the other half is a secret so dangerous that speaking it too soon could destroy her before she is ready to hold it. She was raised by her mother in a small cabin at the edge of the northern woods, far from any pack, far from any city, far from anyone who might recognize the mark that sometimes flickered faintly beneath her collarbone on nights when the moon hung low and full. Her mother, a quiet woman named Margaret, never spoke of her own past. She only ever said one thing, over and over, like a lesson carved into stone. Never let them see what you are, until you are strong enough to survive what happens after they see it. Elena had not understood those words as a child. She understands them now, kneeling on cold marble in front of a laughing crowd, more than she has ever understood anything in her life. "Say something," Draven demands, stopping in front of her, close enough that his shadow falls across her bowed shoulders. "Defend yourself, or is it true, all of it? Are you really nothing but a beggar who crawled her way into my family's name?" The hall falls quiet again, waiting. Even the older alphas, The ones who rarely react to anything lean forward slightly in their seats. This is the kind of moment that becomes legend, the kind of story that gets repeated for years in every territory across the land. A public fall from grace, a woman exposed, a pack humiliated by its own bad judgment in choosing her. Elena finally looks up. Her dark hair falls messily around her face. Her dress is torn at the shoulder from being dragged. Her feet are raw and red against the marble, but her eyes are steady, and there is something in them that makes Draven's smug expression falter, just for a heartbeat, before he covers it with a sneer. "I never claimed to be more than I am," she says, her voice quiet, but carrying farther than it should in a room this size. "You built the story you wanted about me. I never corrected it, because it was never mine to correct. It is not a denial. It is not a confession either. It is something else entirely, something careful and precise, and it does not satisfy Draven at all." His jaw tightens. "Careful," he warns, leaning down toward her. "Do not think that clever words will save you tonight. Every king in this hall is a witness. Whatever happens to you now, happens with their blessing." A chill moves through the room, but Elena does not shrink from it. Instead, something strange begins to happen, something so subtle that at first only a handful of people notice it. Along the walls of the grand hall, ancient iron torches, lit only for ceremonies like this one, begin to flicker in a rhythm that has nothing to do with any draft in the room. They dim, then flare, dim, then flare, in perfect time with the beating of Elena's heart. An old alpha near the back, a silver-haired man named Edmund Hollis, who has sat through 6 summits in his long life, narrows his eyes at the torches. He has seen fire behave strangely only once before, decades ago, in a story his own grandfather told him as a child, a story about bloodlines so old and so powerful that even flame could sense their presence. He leans toward the alpha beside him, a broad-shouldered man named Rowan Vale, and murmurs something too quiet for the rest of the hall to hear. Rowan's expression shifts from boredom to something sharper, more alert. His eyes move to Elena and stay there. Draven, too focused on his own performance to notice the fire, straightens up and turns back to the crowd, arms spread wide, inviting them to share in his victory. "You see, even now, she has nothing to say for herself, no family to call on, no pack to stand behind her. She came into my house with lies, and tonight she leaves with the truth exposed for everyone to see." The crowd murmurs its agreement, though a few faces, scattered here and there among the thrones, remain unreadable. Not everyone in this hall is laughing. Not everyone believes the story Draven is telling quite so easily. Elena's knees ache against the hard floor, and the cold of the marble has soaked through what little warmth was left in her skin, but she does not move to adjust her position. Moving now, flinching now, would be exactly what Draven wants. It would give him the satisfaction of watching her break, and she refuses, absolutely refuses, to give him that gift. Instead, she lets her mind drift, just for a moment, to her mother's face, worn thin by illness in her final days, whispering the same warning she had given 100 times before. "There will come a night when you cannot hide anymore. When that night comes, you will know it, because the fire will know it first." Elena had thought, at the time, that her mother was simply speaking in riddles born of fever and pain. Now, kneeling in a hall full of flickering torches that seemed to answer to her own pulse, she is no longer sure her mother was speaking in riddles at all. Near the front row, a man sits apart from the noise, wrapped in a long dark coat despite the warmth of the hall. He has not laughed once since Elena was thrown to the floor. He has not spoken a single word, has not joined the murmuring, has not so much as shifted in his seat. His name, though few in the hall dare to say it too loudly, is Kian Locke, Alpha King of the Northern Wastes, a territory so isolated and so feared that most other kings avoid even mentioning it by name. Kian watches Elena the way a hunter watches something he has been searching for his entire life, without knowing its shape. His eyes are fixed not on her face, not on her torn dress or her bruised knees, but on the faint shimmer beneath the collar of her dress, a shimmer that flickers in time with the torches along the wall, a shimmer that most in the room are too distracted to notice at all. Draven, still riding the high of his own performance, turns back toward Elena one final time, his voice dropping into something colder, crueler, meant only for her ears, even as it somehow still carries across the silent hall. "You should have stayed hidden," he says. "Wherever you crawled out from, you should have stayed there. Instead, you thought you could become someone. Tonight, in front of everyone who matters, I am going to remind you exactly what you are." He raises a hand, signaling to the guards standing near the hall's grand entrance, and the doors creak open once more, revealing two more figures being dragged in, both wearing the same simple gray clothing Elena arrived in. Servants. People who worked beside her in the Ashford household, people whose only crime was showing her small kindnesses over the years. Draven intends to punish them too, to make an example so complete that no one in any territory will ever again mistake kindness toward Elena Grant for anything but foolishness. The sight of them, frightened and confused, finally breaks something loose in Elena's chest. Not fear, something closer to fury, banked low and controlled, but present now in a way it was not a moment ago. Her mother's warning rises again in her mind, clearer this time, more certain. There will come a night when you cannot hide anymore. The torches along the wall flare bright all at once, every single one, bathing the entire hall in a sudden wash of golden light so intense that several alphas shield their eyes and rise halfway out of their seats. Draven stumbles back a step, momentarily blinded, his triumphant expression cracking into confusion. And beneath her collarbone, hidden until this exact moment beneath torn fabric and years of careful concealment, a mark begins to glow, faint at first, then brighter, until it is unmistakable even from the farthest row of thrones. A symbol none of the younger kings recognize, but one that makes Edmund Hollis rise fully to his feet, his weathered face pale with something between disbelief and reverence. "That cannot be," he whispers, though this time his voice carries far enough for those nearest him to hear. "That mark has not been seen in 1,000 years." Kian Locke rises too, slower, deliberate, his dark eyes never leaving Elena's face. Something ancient stirs behind his gaze, an instinct buried so deep in his blood that he has never once, in all his years as Alpha King, felt anything like it before. Elena Grant kneels in the center of the grand hall, barefoot, bruised, surrounded by 300 men who came tonight, expecting to watch her fall. Instead, for the first time in her life, the fire in the room is answering to her, and every king who matters is about to learn that the woman they came to mock is not who they believed her to be at all. The light from the torches does not fade. If anything, it grows steadier, settling into a low golden glow that bathes the entire hall in warmth, as though the fire itself has finally found what it was searching for. 300 Alpha Kings sit frozen in their seats, and for the first time since Elena Grant was dragged through the doors, no one is laughing. Draven Ashford blinks against the light, one hand raised to shield his eyes, his earlier confidence slipping from his face like water through open fingers. He looks at Elena, then at the mark glowing beneath her torn collar, then back at the crowd, searching for someone, anyone, to tell him this is a trick, a costume, a clever illusion meant to embarrass him further. "This means nothing," he says, though his voice has lost the booming certainty it carried only moments ago. "A parlor trick, nothing more." Edmund Hollis, still standing near the back of the hall, shakes his head slowly. His voice, though aged and rough, carries the kind of authority that comes only from decades of survival among the ruling packs. "I have sat through 6 summits, Draven Ashford. I have seen wolves shift mid-air to avoid falling blades. I have seen alphas call storms with nothing but their voice. I have never, in all those years, seen fire answer to a heartbeat the way it just answered to hers." Whispers spread through the hall again, but they carry a different weight now, uncertain, wary, nothing like the mocking laughter from before. Several kings lean toward one another, trading quiet questions none of them seem able to answer. Others simply stare at Elena, studying her the way one might study a puzzle that has suddenly revealed an unexpected piece. Elena remains on her knees, though something in her posture has shifted. She is no longer folded in on herself, no longer trying to disappear beneath the weight of the crowd's judgment. Instead, she holds herself upright, her chin level, her breathing steady despite the storm rising around her. She does not fully understand what is happening to her own body, but she recognizes, deep in her bones, that the moment her mother warned her about has finally arrived. At the front of the hall, Kian Lok has not moved from where he stands, his dark coat pooling around his boots, his expression unreadable to everyone, except perhaps himself. He has spent his entire life as Alpha King of the Northern Wastes, learning to mask what he feels, a skill born from ruling over a territory that shows no mercy to weakness. But tonight, standing this close to the mark glowing beneath Elena's collar, he feels something crack open inside him that he has no name for. He remembers, faintly, a story his grandmother told him when he was young, back before he inherited his throne, back before the Northern Wastes hardened him into the man he is now. A story about the first wolf, the original bloodline from which every alpha's power was said to descend. A line believed lost to time, hunted to extinction generations ago by kings who feared what such power might mean for their own rule. He had never believed the story was anything more than that. A story, a myth, passed down to frighten children into respecting the old laws. Yet here, in the middle of a hall filled with the very kings whose ancestors once hunted that bloodline into hiding, the mark glows exactly as his grandmother described it, down to the faintest detail. Draven, sensing the room slipping away from him, tries once more to regain control. He turns toward his own father, seated in the front row among the Ashford territory's closest allies, silently pleading for support. His father, a heavy-set man named Corwin Ashford, rises slowly, his face carefully composed into something between concern and calculation. "My son may have spoken in anger," Corwin says, addressing the hall rather than Elena directly, his voice smooth and practiced, the voice of a man who has spent years navigating politics far more dangerous than a single humiliated bride. But the concern remains valid. If this woman carries a mark of significance, should we not know where it comes from, and why she hid it from a household that took her in and raised her as one of their own? It is a clever move, shifting the conversation away from cruelty and toward suspicion, casting Elena once again as the deceiver rather than the deceived. A few kings nod along, willing to entertain the idea that whatever power she carries might be dangerous rather than deserving of respect. Elena finally speaks, her voice quiet, but steady enough to reach every corner of the silent hall. "I hid nothing that was mine to reveal. My mother taught me caution before she taught me anything else, because she knew what happens to bloodlines the old kings fear." "And what bloodline is that?" Corwin asks, his tone carefully neutral, though his eyes have sharpened considerably since the torches first flared. Elena hesitates. Not out of fear, but out of the weight of finally speaking words she has carried in silence for her entire life. Her mother's warnings echo in her mind one final time, urging caution, urging patience, urging her to wait until she was strong enough to survive what came after the truth was spoken. But kneeling here, surrounded by 300 kings, and the ashes of a life she is about to leave behind, she understands that waiting is no longer an option. "The first bloodline," she says simply, "the line every alpha's power is said to descend from, the line your ancestors believed they destroyed." The silence that follows is absolute. Even the torches seem to dim slightly, as though the entire hall is holding its breath. Corwin Ashford's face drains of color, and for the first time all evening, Draven looks genuinely afraid rather than merely cruel. "That bloodline was ended 1,000 years ago," Corwin says, though his voice wavers on the words. "Every record, every account, confirms it. There is no possible way." And yet, Edmund Hollis interrupts, his gaze fixed on the mark still glowing softly beneath Elena's collar. Here she kneels, marked exactly as the old texts describe, in a hall full of fire that answers only to her. Kian Lok finally steps forward, his boots echoing against the marble in the otherwise silent hall. Every eye in the room follows his movement, because an alpha king of his standing rarely involves himself directly in another territory's disputes, and never without reason. He stops a few feet from where Elena kneels, close enough that she can feel the weight of his presence pressing against the air between them, though he makes no move to touch her. "Rise," he says, his voice low but carrying easily through the silence. Elena hesitates, uncertain whether obeying a command from an alpha king she has never met is wise, given everything that has already gone wrong tonight. But something in the way he says the word, not as an order meant to control her, but almost as a request, makes her decide to trust it. Slowly, painfully, her bare feet still raw from being dragged across marble, she rises to stand before him. Standing, she is not as small as the crowd expected, not as fragile as the torn dress and bruised knees suggested. There is something in the way she holds herself now, upright and steady, that makes even the most powerful men in the hall reconsider everything they thought they understood about the woman kneeling before them only moments ago. Kian studies her for a long moment, his dark eyes moving from the mark beneath her collar to her face, searching for something he cannot quite name. Then, without warning, without any command from anyone in the hall, he lowers himself to one knee before her, bowing his head in a gesture so unexpected that the entire hall gasps as one. "Forgive me," he says quietly, his voice rough with something that sounds almost like reverence. "I did not recognize you sooner." Gasps ripple through the crowd, followed by a wave of stunned murmuring. Kian Lok, Alpha King of the Northern Wastes, feared by every territory in the land, has never bowed to anyone in his life, not even to the ruling council that oversees the summit itself. To see him kneel now, before a woman dragged into the hall as a supposed fraud only minutes ago, sends a shock through the room that no one, not even Draven, seems able to process. "Get up," Draven snaps, though his voice cracks slightly on the words, betraying the fear now creeping into his chest. "This is absurd. She is nothing but an Omega who lied her way into my family's trust. Whatever trick she has performed here tonight changes nothing about who she actually is." Kian rises slowly, his dark eyes locking onto Draven with an intensity that makes the younger Alpha take an involuntary step back. "You dragged her here barefoot," Kian says, his voice low and dangerous, "to humiliate her in front of every ruling king in this land. And now that the truth has revealed itself, you still refuse to see what is standing right in front of you." Corwin Ashford, sensing the ground shifting rapidly beneath his family's feet, tries once more to salvage the situation. Even if the mark is genuine, even if her claim to the first bloodline holds truth, that does not erase the years of deception. She lied about her family, about her past, about everything she told this household. Elena turns to face him directly, and something in her expression has changed since she first knelt on the cold marble floor. There is no more hesitation in her voice, no more careful restraint. "I never claimed a false family. I simply never revealed my true one, because revealing it too soon would have gotten me killed by exactly the kind of king who now sits comfortably in this hall, pretending to be shocked by what he sees." The accusation lands heavily across the room, and several kings shift uncomfortably in their seats, aware that their own ancestors may well have played a role in hunting the very bloodline now standing before them. The old stories, dismissed for generations as myth, suddenly feel far too close to something true. Near the front of the hall, another figure rises from his seat, a broad-shouldered man with graying hair named Rowan Vale, Alpha King of the Eastern Hollows. He has said little all evening, watching the events unfold with careful, calculating eyes, but now he steps forward, drawing every gaze in the room toward him. "I have heard enough," Rowan says, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned over decades of rule. "Whatever quarrel exists between this woman and the Ashford pack is a private matter, but the mark she carries is not private. It belongs to every territory in this hall, because it concerns the very foundation our power is built upon." He turns to Elena, his expression unreadable but not unkind. "If you truly carry the first bloodline, then you deserve far more than a place kneeling on this floor. You deserve a seat among us." The hall erupts into a mixture of protest and stunned agreement, voices rising over one another as 300 kings begin to argue amongst themselves about what this discovery means for the balance of power they have spent generations carefully maintaining. Through it all, Elena stands quietly at the center, barefoot, bruised, and marked with a symbol none of them expected to see in their lifetime, watching the world she thought she understood begin to rearrange itself entirely around her. The argument spreading through the hall grows louder with every passing second, 300 voices rising over one another, until the sound becomes a wall of noise that presses against Elena from every direction. She stands still at the center of it, the marble cold beneath her bare feet, watching as the world she thought she understood begins to rearrange itself in real time. Rowan Vale raises a hand, and though he holds no formal authority over the other kings, something in his posture commands enough respect that the noise gradually dies down. Shouting at one another will not settle this, he says. We need proof beyond a mark and a flicker of fire, no matter how convincing it appears. What proof would satisfy you? Elena asks, her voice steady, despite the exhaustion beginning to creep into her limbs. She has been awake since before dawn, dragged through half the estate before being thrown into this hall, and the adrenaline that carried her through the first wave of humiliation is beginning to fade, leaving raw nerves in its place. Edmund Hollis steps forward again, his weathered hands folded in front of him. The old texts describe more than a mark, he says. They describe a bond. The first bloodline was said to carry the ability to command the loyalty of any wolf, not through force, but through recognition. A true descendant would be known instantly by every wolf in a room, whether they wished to acknowledge it or not. All eyes turn to Kian Locke, still standing near Elena, his earlier bow to her still fresh in every mind. Draven seizes the opportunity, his voice sharp with desperation. Then let us test it properly. Not with one alpha who clearly has his own reasons for playing along, but with all of us. If she truly carries what she claims, let every king in this hall bear witness to what happens when she calls upon it. It is a dangerous suggestion, and Elena understands immediately what he intends. If nothing happens, if the room remains as it was before, filled with mockery and doubt, then Draven will have exactly what he wanted from the beginning. A public collapse of her claim, undeniable and complete. But if she refuses the test, that refusal itself will be treated as proof of deception. Kian's jaw tightens, and for a moment it looks as though he might refuse on her behalf, but Elena speaks before he can. Fine, she says. Let them test it. A murmur runs through the crowd, equal parts anticipation and disbelief. Corwin Ashford, still pale from the earlier revelation, gestures toward the guards stationed near the hall's grand entrance. Bring forward a neutral wolf, he says, someone with no allegiance to either the Ashford pack or to Alpha Locke. Let the test be fair. A young guard is brought forward from the edge of the hall, a man named Finn who serves under no particular pack, hired only for the summit's security. He looks uncertain as he is pushed toward the center of the room, clearly unaware of what role he has just been assigned in a drama far larger than himself. Approach her, Corwin instructs. If the bloodline is real, your wolf should recognize her presence the moment you draw near, regardless of what your mind tells you to believe. Finn hesitates, glancing between Corwin and Elena, before stepping forward slowly, his boots echoing against the marble floor. Elena watches him approach, uncertain herself what is supposed to happen, having never in her life stood this close to another wolf, while the mark beneath her collar glowed openly for the world to see. As Finn draws within a few steps of her, something shifts in his expression. His shoulders, tense with nerves only a moment before, suddenly relax, and his eyes, which had been fixed warily on her face, soften into something closer to awe. Without any command, without any conscious decision that Elena can see reflected in his face, he sinks to one knee before her, exactly as Kian had done earlier. The hall falls into stunned silence once more. A wolf with no history, no allegiance, no reason at all to perform such a gesture, has knelt before her within seconds of standing close enough to feel whatever pull the mark carries. Corwin Ashford stares at the scene with an expression caught somewhere between disbelief and dread, while Draven's face has gone entirely white. That proves nothing, Draven says, though his voice lacks any real conviction now. He could have been paid, coached. Anyone could arrange such a display. I have never met her before tonight, Finn says quietly, still kneeling, his voice carrying an honesty that is impossible to fake in front of a hall full of kings, trained to detect deception. I do not know why I knelt. I only know that when I stood close to her, everything in me told me it was the right thing to do. Rowan Vale exchanges a glance with Edmund Hollis, both men clearly reaching the same conclusion at the same moment. One test may be arranged, Rowan says carefully, but a single wolf, paid or not, coached or not, does not settle a matter this significant for every territory in this hall. Before anyone can respond, movement stirs near the back of the room. Several younger alphas, Men who have said nothing throughout the entire evening begin rising from their seats one by one, drawn forward by something they cannot fully explain, their expressions caught somewhere between confusion and compulsion. They move toward the center of the hall almost involuntarily, footsteps slow and uncertain, as though each one is fighting some instinct buried deep within his own blood. Elena watches them come, her heart pounding against her ribs, uncertain whether to be afraid or hopeful. She has spent her entire life hiding from moments like this, and now, standing exposed in the middle of the most powerful gathering in the world, she has no way to predict what happens next. The first of the young alphas to reach her, a lean man with sharp features named William Hart, stops a few feet away and simply stares at her for a long moment before sinking slowly to his knees, his head bowed low. Behind him, another follows, then another, until nearly a dozen younger kings kneel in a loose circle around her, none of them able to fully explain why they have done so. "This is not coaching," Edmund says quietly, more to himself than to anyone else, though his words carry through the hushed hall. "This is recognition, exactly as the old texts describe." Draven, watching his carefully constructed humiliation collapse into something far beyond his control, takes a step back toward his throne, his composure cracking further with every passing second. "Enough of this," he says, though his voice shakes slightly. "Whatever strange influence she holds over the weak-minded among us changes nothing about the years she spent lying to my family." "Careful, Draven," Corwin murmurs, placing a warning hand on his son's arm, his own expression grim with the calculations already running behind his eyes. Whatever political advantage he thought his family stood to gain tonight has clearly evaporated, replaced by something far more dangerous. A woman whose bloodline may soon command loyalty across every territory represented in this hall. Kian Locke, still standing close to Elena, watches the kneeling kings with an expression that mixes pride with something closer to protectiveness. He has spent his life ruling the harshest territory in the land, a place where weakness is never tolerated and mercy is a luxury few can afford. Yet standing here, watching wolves he has known for years kneel before a woman none of them had ever met until tonight, he feels something shift permanently in his understanding of the world. "You should sit," he says quietly to Elena, his voice low enough that only she can hear it over the murmuring crowd. "You have been standing on injured feet for too long, and whatever is happening here is far from finished." Elena shakes her head slightly, though gratitude flickers behind her eyes at the offer. "If I sit now, it will look like weakness. I have spent my whole life being told to hide what I am. I am not ready to hide the fact that I can still stand on my own." Kian studies her for a long moment, something like respect settling into his expression, before he nods once and steps back slightly, giving her space while remaining close enough to intervene, should anyone in the hall decide to test her claim in a less peaceful manner. Rowan Vale raises his voice once more, addressing the full hall now, his tone carrying the weight of a man accustomed to settling disputes between powerful and dangerous men. "We cannot resolve the full implications of this discovery tonight," he says. "But we can agree, at minimum, that this woman does not deserve to be treated as she has been treated in this hall. Whatever her bloodline ultimately proves to be, no wolf under this roof kneels without reason, and tonight, a dozen have knelt before her without instruction." A murmur of agreement moves through a significant portion of the crowd, though scattered pockets of doubt remain, particularly among the kings closest to the Ashford territory, who understand exactly how much political ground they stand to lose if Elena's claim is fully validated. Draven, sensing the tide turning irreversibly against him, makes one final desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. "If she truly carries the first bloodline," he says, his voice rising with a mixture of anger and fear, "then let her prove it fully. Let her face a true challenge, not a room full of wolves overwhelmed by some trick of instinct, but a direct test of strength, the kind every alpha in this hall has had to endure to earn their throne." The suggestion draws immediate reaction, some kings nodding in agreement that such a test would be fair, others frowning at the clear desperation behind Draven's words. Elena feels a fresh wave of exhaustion pull at her limbs, but beneath it, something steadier rises to meet the challenge, an echo of every quiet lesson her mother taught her in their small cabin at the edge of the northern woods. "Name your test," she says, meeting Draven's eyes directly for the first time since being dragged into the hall. I have spent my entire life being underestimated. I am not afraid of one more challenge. The hall falls silent again, waiting to see what Draven will demand, and whether the woman he tried to destroy in front of the world's most powerful kings is truly prepared to prove, once and for all, exactly what she is. Draven paces in front of his throne, buying himself time, while his mind races through every possible way to turn this moment back in his favor. The hall waits, 300 kings, watching him, with the same intensity they had watched Elena only minutes before, and he can feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on him now, instead of her. A trial of presence, he finally says, settling on words that sound official enough to mask how quickly he invented them. Every alpha in this hall carries a private chamber beneath the summit grounds, sealed rooms used for meditation before ceremonies. If her bloodline is real, if her blood truly carries the weight of the first line, she should be able to walk into the deepest chamber, the one reserved for the ruling council alone, and awaken the seal that has not responded to any wolf outside that council in 3 generations. A ripple of surprise moves through the hall. Several older kings exchange glances, clearly recalling stories about the sealed chamber that few outside the ruling council have ever entered. Edmund Hollis frowns, stepping forward with visible concern. That chamber was built to test bloodline purity among candidates for the council itself, he says. It is not a parlor trick, Draven. Wolves without sufficient claim to ancient lines who attempt to enter that chamber do not simply fail. The seal has been known to harm those who try and cannot pass. Then we will know the truth beyond any doubt, Draven says, a flicker of his earlier confidence returning now that he has found a test dangerous enough to make even his rivals hesitate. If she is truly what she claims, the chamber will recognize her without harm. If she is not, then this entire hall will finally see the lie for what it is. Elena feels a cold weight settle in her stomach, though she keeps her expression carefully composed. She has never heard of this chamber before tonight, has no way of knowing what waits inside it, and the risk Draven is proposing is far greater than anything she anticipated when she agreed to face a challenge only moments ago. Kian steps forward immediately, his voice sharp with objection. This is reckless even by your standards, Draven. You are proposing a test that could kill her, built on rules from a chamber that has not been used in decades. She agreed to a challenge, Draven says, spreading his hands as though the matter is entirely out of his control now. I am simply naming one worthy of the claim she has made. The hall stirs with conflicting murmurs, some kings clearly troubled by the danger of the proposed test, others intrigued by the idea of finally settling the matter beyond any argument. Rowan Vale studies Elena carefully, his expression unreadable, before speaking again. The choice belongs to her, he says. No one in this hall can force her into a chamber that carries genuine risk. If she declines, her claim remains unresolved, but her dignity remains intact. If she accepts, she does so understanding the danger fully. Every eye in the hall turns to Elena. She thinks of her mother, of the small cabin at the edge of the northern woods, of years spent hiding a mark she barely understood herself, taught only enough to survive without ever hearing the reasons why. She thinks of the guards dragging her barefoot across marble, of Draven's sneering voice calling her nothing in front of the entire world, of every small cruelty she absorbed silently because speaking up seemed more dangerous than staying quiet. She is done staying quiet. I accept, she says, and her voice does not waver. Kian's jaw tightens, but he does not argue further, understanding that the decision belongs to her alone. Instead, he steps closer, lowering his voice so only she can hear him. Whatever happens in that chamber, you do not walk in alone. I am coming with you to the entrance, and I will be waiting the moment you walk back out. Something in his words, steady and certain despite the danger surrounding them, settles the trembling in Elena's chest, just enough for her to nod once in response. The hall begins to move, guards and kings alike shifting toward a hidden passage behind the ceremonial platform, one that Elena had not even noticed until Corwin Ashford, his expression grim, gestures for it to be opened. Ancient stone steps spiral downward into darkness, lit only by torches spaced unevenly along the curving walls, and the temperature drops noticeably, as the procession descends beneath the summit grounds. The passage seems to stretch on longer than the architecture above should allow, a detail that makes Elena's skin prickle with unease, though she says nothing, focused instead on placing one bare foot in front of the other, against increasingly rough stone. Behind her, the procession of kings follows in near silence, their earlier arguments replaced by the heavy weight of anticipation. Finally, the passage opens into a wide chamber, carved directly from the mountain rock beneath the summit hall. At its center stands a massive stone door, etched with symbols so old and worn that most of them have faded beyond recognition, save for one mark near the top that glows faintly, even in the dim torchlight, a mark identical to the one beneath Elena's collar. Edmund Hollis stares at the matching symbols with an expression of open astonishment. "In all my years attending this summit," he murmurs, "I have never seen the door respond to anyone before they even approached it." Draven, standing near the back of the procession, says nothing, though his face has taken on a pale, uncertain cast that suggests even he is beginning to doubt the wisdom of the test he proposed. Kian walks beside Elena until they reach the base of the stone steps leading up to the door itself. He stops there, as instructed by the ancient rules of the chamber, unable to accompany her any farther. "This is as far as I am permitted to go," he says quietly. "Whatever waits beyond that door, you face it alone, but you do not have to be afraid of it." Elena looks up at the massive stone door, its glowing symbol pulsing faintly in rhythm with her own heartbeat, exactly as the torches in the grand hall had done earlier that night. She thinks of her mother's final words, spoken through labored breath in the quiet of their small cabin, words she has carried with her every day since. "There will come a night when you cannot hide anymore. When that night comes, do not be afraid of what you find. Be afraid only of staying hidden when the world finally needs you to stand." She climbs the remaining steps alone, her bare feet silent against the ancient stone, and places her palm flat against the center of the glowing symbol. For a long, breathless moment, nothing happens, and she hears a few scattered gasps from the kings gathered below, uncertain whether they are witnessing a miracle unfolding or a tragedy about to begin. Then the symbol beneath her palm flares to life, spreading outward across the entire surface of the door, in a wave of golden light so bright that several kings shield their eyes. The ancient stone groans, shifting for the first time in generations, and slowly, the massive door begins to open, revealing a chamber beyond it filled with soft, ancient light and the faint, unmistakable hum of power that has waited 1,000 years for someone worthy enough to answer its call. The chamber beyond the door is unlike anything Elena has ever seen. The walls rise in smooth curves of pale stone, etched with symbols that seem to shift and rearrange themselves the longer she looks at them, though she cannot be certain if the movement is real or simply a trick of the strange golden light filling the room. At the center of the chamber stands a shallow basin carved from the same stone as the walls, filled with water so still it looks more like glass than liquid. Behind her, the massive door remains open, and she can hear the distant murmur of the kings gathered below, though the sound feels muffled, as though the chamber itself is holding its breath along with everyone inside it. She steps forward slowly, her bare feet silent against smooth stone that feels warm rather than cold, and stops at the edge of the still basin. Her reflection stares back at her from the water's surface, but something about it seems wrong, slightly delayed, as though the image is a half-second behind her actual movements. She frowns, leaning closer, and the reflection shifts entirely, no longer showing her torn dress and bruised knees, but instead showing a woman she has never seen before, dressed in old-fashioned robes, standing in this exact chamber generations ago. "You carry my blood," the reflection says, though Elena hears no sound at all, the words arriving instead directly in her mind, clear and unmistakable. "I am Elowen, first of our line to seal this chamber, the last to walk freely among the packs before the hunting began." Elena's breath catches in her throat. "The hunting," she repeats. "The kings who destroyed our bloodline." "Not destroyed," Elowen's reflection says, her expression calm despite the weight of her words. "Driven into hiding, scattered so thoroughly that even we began to believe extinction had claimed us. Your mother carried this knowledge, passed down through generations too frightened to speak it aloud, waiting for a descendant strong enough to survive the truth. Images begin to form in the still water, flickering scenes of a distant past. Elena watches wolves of the first line, dozens of them, living openly among the early packs, respected and honored rather than feared. She watches the slow shift that followed, ambitious alphas, growing resentful of a bloodline whose mere presence commanded loyalty they had to work generations to earn through conquest and politics. She watches the hunting begin, quiet at first, then brutal, until the first line scattered into hiding, their descendants taught to bury every trace of what they carried. "Why show me this now?" Elena asks, though something in her already suspects the answer. "Because you stand at the same crossroads every descendant before you has faced," Heloin's reflection answers. "Hide, and the bloodline continues in shadow, safe but powerless, waiting for a future that may never come. Or reveal yourself fully, and risk everything, for the chance to end the hunting for good." The water shifts again, showing Elena a vision of the grand hall above, 300 kings watching in stunned silence, as wolves kneel before her without explanation. She watches herself, marked and barefoot, standing at the center of a room built by generations of men who once hunted her ancestors into extinction. "The wolves who knelt tonight did not choose to," Elena says slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. "Something in their blood recognized mine. The first line was never meant to rule through fear," Eloin's reflection says. "It was meant to unite, to remind every wolf that power without loyalty freely given is nothing but cruelty wearing a crown. That is why the old kings feared us. Not because we threatened their thrones directly, but because our presence revealed how hollow their authority truly was." Elena thinks of Draven, of his father Corwin, of every carefully constructed cruelty she endured in their household disguised as tradition and expectation. She thinks of the guards dragging her barefoot across marble, of the laughter that filled the hall before the torches flared to life. She thinks, too, of Cian Locke kneeling before her without hesitation, of Finn, the young guard whose honesty could not be faked, of the dozen young kings who knelt without understanding why. "I do not want a crown built on fear," Elena says quietly, more to herself than to the reflection watching her from the still water. "I want the hunting to end." The water ripples once more, and Eloin's reflection smiles faintly, an expression that carries generations of hope, finally finding its answer. "Then you already understand what the chamber was built to test. Not strength of blood alone, but strength of intention. Power without purpose destroys everything it touches. Power guided by purpose can heal what was broken 1,000 years ago." The golden light filling the chamber begins to pulse brighter, gathering itself into a single point above the still basin, before flowing outward and settling directly into Elena's chest. Warm and steady, like a heartbeat finally finding its proper rhythm after years of uncertainty. She gasps at the sensation, not painful, but overwhelming, as though a door long sealed within her own body has finally been allowed to open. "Carry it forward," Eloin's voice whispers, fading now as the light around the chamber begins to dim back toward its original soft glow. "Not as a weapon against those who wronged you, but as proof that the bloodline they tried to erase still remembers what true leadership means." The reflection disappears entirely, leaving only Elena's own face staring back at her from the still water, though something in her expression has changed permanently. The exhaustion is still there, the bruises still ache beneath her torn dress, but underneath it all, something steadier has settled into place, a certainty she has never allowed herself to feel before tonight. She turns from the basin and walks back toward the open door, her bare feet silent against the warm stone, and as she crosses the threshold back into the outer chamber, where Cian and the gathered kings wait, the mark beneath her collar blazes brighter than it has all evening, visible even through the fabric of her torn dress, a beacon that no one in the chamber can mistake for anything other than exactly what it is. Cian is the first to reach her, his dark eyes searching her face with obvious relief before settling into something quieter, more reverent. "You are unharmed," he says, though it comes out somewhere between a statement and a question. "I am more than unharmed," Elena says, and for the first time since being dragged through the doors of the grand hall, her voice carries a steadiness that silences every remaining doubt among the gathered kings watching from the base of the steps. "I have seen what this chamber was built to protect. I have seen what your ancestors tried to erase," and I am done letting fear decide what I am allowed to become. Behind her, the massive stone door begins to seal itself once more, the glowing symbol fading gradually back into worn, ancient stone, its purpose fulfilled for the first time in generations. Edmund Hollis stares at the closing door with an expression of pure astonishment, while Corwin Ashford, standing near the back of the gathered kings, looks as though the ground beneath his feet has shifted permanently and irreversibly. Draven says nothing at all, his earlier confidence entirely gone, replaced by the dawning realization that whatever plan he walked into this summit believing he controlled has slipped entirely beyond his reach. The procession climbs back up the narrow stone steps in near total silence, torchlight flickering unevenly against the walls as 300 kings follow behind Elena and Kian, none of them quite willing to break the heavy quiet that has settled over the group. By the time they emerge back into the grand hall, word of what happened in the chamber has already begun spreading among the servants and guards who remained above, so that the hall itself seems to hum with anticipation before the doors have even fully opened. Elena steps back into the golden light of the chandeliers, and the moment her bare feet touch the marble floor of the grand hall, every torch along the walls flares bright once more, exactly as they had when she first knelt at the center of the room. Only this time, she is not kneeling. She stands tall, the mark beneath her collar glowing steadily, visible now even through the torn fabric of her dress, and the entire hall falls utterly silent as 300 kings take in the sight of her. Rowan Vale is the first to speak, stepping forward from where he waited near the platform. The chamber has not opened for anyone outside the ruling council in 3 generations, he says, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall. It opened for her without hesitation. I saw it myself, Edmund Hollis confirms, moving to stand beside Rowan, his earlier caution replaced now by something closer to conviction. The seal recognized her the moment she touched it. There is no trick capable of producing what I witnessed tonight. A wave of murmurs spreads through the crowd, though this time, the sound carries none of the mockery from earlier in the evening. Instead, it carries something closer to disbelief, mixed with a dawning, uncertain reverence, the sound of 300 powerful men, slowly realizing that everything they believed about the world's oldest bloodline may have been wrong. Draven watches from near his throne, his face pale, his earlier arrogance nowhere to be found. He glances toward his father, silently pleading for some way out of the disaster unfolding in front of the entire summit, but Corwin's expression offers no comfort, only the grim calculation of a man watching his family's political standing collapse in real time. This changes everything, Corwin finally says, his voice quieter than before, though it still carries across the hall. If her claim is proven beyond doubt, then the Ashford territory has publicly humiliated a descendant of the first line, in front of every ruling king in the land. The consequences of that alone could unravel alliances we have spent generations building. The consequences, Kian says, stepping forward beside Elena, his voice low and dangerous, should concern you far less than the fact that your son dragged an innocent woman barefoot through this hall and called her nothing in front of 300 witnesses. Bloodline or not, that cruelty alone should be answered. A murmur of agreement moves through a significant portion of the crowd, and Elena watches, almost with disbelief, as several kings who had laughed loudest during her humiliation now shift uncomfortably in their seats, unwilling to meet her eyes. The shame that should have belonged entirely to her only an hour ago has begun, slowly and unmistakably, to settle onto different shoulders. I did what was expected of me, Draven says, though his voice lacks any real conviction now, the words sounding more like a desperate attempt to justify himself than a genuine defense. She lied about her bloodline. What was I supposed to think, given the story she allowed my family to believe? You were supposed to ask her, Elena says, and though her voice remains quiet, it carries an authority that silences the murmuring crowd instantly. In 3 years of engagement, you never once asked me about my past with any genuine curiosity. You built the story that suited your family's ambitions and never bothered to question whether it was true, because the truth was never as important to you as the appearance of it. Draven has no answer for that, and the silence following her words stretches uncomfortably long, broken only by the soft crackle of torches along the walls. Somewhere near the middle of the hall, One of the younger kings who had knelt before Elena earlier in the evening, William Hart, rises slowly from his seat once more. "I do not know the full history between you and the Ashford family," he says, addressing Elena directly, his voice carrying a conviction that surprises even himself. "But I know what I felt when I stood near you tonight. Whatever politics exist between territories, whatever alliances are at risk, I will not sit quietly while a woman who carries the blood every one of us descends from is treated as though she deserves to be dragged across a floor like refuse." His words land heavily across the hall, and several other kings nod in agreement, some visibly moved, others simply recognizing the shifting tide of opinion and choosing to align themselves with it before the outcome becomes fully certain. Corwin Ashford, watching the room slip further from his control with every passing moment, makes one final attempt to salvage what remains of his family's standing. "Perhaps an arrangement can still be reached," he says, turning toward Elena with an expression that attempts warmth, but fails to mask the calculation beneath it. "If your claim to the first line is genuine, an alliance between your bloodline and our territory would benefit everyone involved. My son spoke in haste tonight, but the engagement between you could still—" "No," Elena says, cutting him off with a single word that carries more finality than anything spoken in the hall all evening. "I have spent 3 years being shaped into whatever your family needed me to be, silent about my own history, because silence was safer than truth. That arrangement ends tonight, regardless of what my bloodline proves to be." Corwin's expression tightens, but he says nothing further, understanding that pressing the matter now, in front of 300 witnesses already sympathetic to her, would only damage his family's standing further. Draven, for his part, looks as though he wants to argue, but the fight has gone out of him entirely, replaced by the sinking realization that whatever future he imagined for himself, walking into this summit, has been irreversibly altered. Rowan Vale steps forward once more, raising his voice to address the full hall. "Whatever remains unresolved between the Ashford territory and this woman is a matter for another time," he says. "Tonight, we have witnessed something none of us expected to see in our lifetime, proof of a bloodline believed lost for 1,000 years, standing in this very hall. The question before us now is not whether her claim is genuine. The question is what this summit intends to do about it." The hall falls quiet again, every king present understanding the weight of what Rowan has just asked. Alliances built over generations, territories carved out through careful negotiation and inherited power, all of it suddenly uncertain in the presence of a bloodline whose mere existence threatens to reshape the balance every ruling family has depended on for centuries. Elena stands at the center of it all, barefoot still, her torn dress a stark contrast to the golden light bathing the hall, and for the first time since being dragged through those doors, she allows herself to feel something other than careful restraint. Not triumph exactly, and not vengeance either, though both flicker somewhere beneath the surface. Something closer to purpose, steady and unshakable, settling into place exactly as Elowen's reflection had described in the chamber below. She thinks of her mother, of the small cabin at the edge of the northern woods, of a lifetime spent teaching caution because caution was the only tool available to keep her safe. She thinks of every king in this hall whose ancestors once hunted her bloodline into hiding, now watching her with expressions ranging from fear to reverence to something that might, eventually, become genuine respect. The hunting ends tonight, she thinks, and though she says nothing aloud, something in her expression carries the weight of that decision clearly enough that even Draven, standing pale and silent near his throne, understands exactly what is coming next. Rowan's question hangs in the air, and for a long moment, no one in the hall seems willing to answer it first. 300 kings, accustomed to holding absolute authority within their own territories, suddenly find themselves uncertain how to respond to a situation none of their training or tradition prepared them for. Elena watches the hesitation ripple across the room and understands, with sudden clarity, that whatever happens next depends entirely on what she chooses to do in this moment. She steps forward, away from Kian's side, moving toward the center of the hall where she first knelt on cold marble, only an hour before. Her bare feet no longer feel the pain of the earlier journey, though the marks remain visible against her skin, a quiet reminder of exactly how this night began. She turns slowly, taking in the full width of the hall, meeting the eyes of king after king, refusing to let a single one look away from her. "I did not come here tonight seeking power," she says, her voice carrying easily now through the silent hall, steady in a way that surprises even herself. "I came here dragged by my own household, thrown to this floor to be humiliated in front of every one of you. I did not choose this moment, but I choose what happens next." The hall remains silent, hanging on her words, and she continues, drawing strength from every year of quiet endurance that led her to this exact point. "For 1,000 years, the bloodline I carry has hidden in fear, taught by every generation before me, that revealing ourselves meant inviting destruction. I understand now why that fear existed. I saw, in the chamber beneath this hall, exactly what happened to those who came before me." Edmund Hollis, standing near the front of the crowd, lowers his head slightly, an unspoken acknowledgement of the history his own ancestors likely played some part in. Elena does not dwell on it, understanding that assigning blame to every king in this room for the actions of their ancestors would accomplish nothing worth pursuing. "I am not here to punish anyone for what happened generations ago," she continues. "I am here to make certain it never happens again, not to my bloodline, and not to any wolf, of any rank, who has ever been made to kneel simply because someone stronger decided they deserved it." A murmur moves through the crowd, some approving, some uncertain, though none openly hostile. Draven, still standing near his throne, watches with an expression caught somewhere between disbelief and dawning fear, aware that whatever consequences await him personally are likely to arrive regardless of how the larger political situation resolves itself. Kian steps forward to stand beside her once more, his presence steady and unwavering, a silent show of support that does not go unnoticed by the watching kings. "The Northern Waste stands with her," he says, his voice carrying the weight of his territory's reputation, a reputation few in this hall are willing to challenge lightly. "Whatever this summit decides tonight, my territory recognizes the first bloodline, and we will not stand quietly while any alpha attempts to undermine what has already been proven beyond doubt." Rowan Vale nods slowly, stepping forward as well. "The Eastern Hollows stands with her also," he says. "I have spent decades watching alliances shift, based on nothing more than fear and ambition. Tonight, I watched something rarer, a truth too significant to deny, no matter how inconvenient it proves for those who benefit from the old order remaining unchallenged." One by one, other kings begin to rise from their seats, some hesitant, others certain, adding their voices and the standing of their territories to the growing consensus forming across the hall. William Hart rises again, followed by two other younger alphas who had knelt earlier without explanation. Even a handful of older kings, men who had laughed loudest during Elena's initial humiliation, rise now, with expressions of quiet shame, offering what support they can, as though hoping to make amends for their earlier cruelty. Not every king rises. A cluster near the Ashford territory's usual seating remains seated, faces carefully neutral, clearly unwilling to commit fully to a shift in power that threatens alliances they have spent years building. Corwin Ashford remains among them, his expression unreadable, calculating still, even as the tide of the hall moves decisively away from his family's earlier confidence. Elena notices the divide but does not press it. She understands, perhaps better than anyone in the hall, that loyalty forced too quickly rarely holds, and that whatever future she intends to build must be earned through actions rather than demanded through a single dramatic evening. She turns instead toward Draven, who has remained standing near his throne throughout the entire exchange, watching his own authority crumble in real time without any way to stop it. "You wanted this hall to witness my humiliation," she says quietly, though her voice carries clearly enough for everyone present to hear. "I will not return the cruelty you offered me tonight, but I will not pretend it did not happen, and I will not remain bound to a household that saw fit to drag me across this floor like something worthless." Draven's jaw tightens, though he says nothing, understanding perhaps for the first time the full weight of what his actions tonight have cost him. Corwin steps forward, his voice carefully measured, despite the tension visible in his shoulders. "The engagement is dissolved then. I hope you understand the political complications that decision creates for both our territories." The complications belong to your family, Elena says simply. I never asked for this engagement. I endured it because refusing seemed more dangerous than accepting. That calculation no longer applies. A guard near the hall's grand entrance stirs, drawing sudden attention as he steps forward hesitantly, still holding the ceremonial staff that marks him as belonging to the Ashford household's personal service. He glances toward Draven, then toward Elena, before making a decision that seems to surprise even himself, lowering the staff and stepping away from his position near the Ashford throne. I have served this household for 6 years, he says quietly, though his voice carries in the hushed hall. I watched how she was treated, quietly, when no summit was watching. I will not pretend loyalty to a family that treats kindness as weakness. His declaration ripples through the assembled servants and lower-ranked guards stationed around the hall's edges, several of whom exchange uncertain glances before a few more step away from their posts near the Ashford section entirely. Draven watches his own household's authority erode piece by piece, and for the first time, real fear settles fully onto his face. The kind of fear that comes from realizing power built on cruelty rarely survives the moment cruelty stops being convenient. This is absurd, Draven says, though his voice has lost all its earlier command, sounding now more like a man grasping desperately at authority, already slipping through his fingers. I am still alpha of this territory. Whatever happened here tonight does not erase generations of my family's rule. No, Elena agrees. It does not erase it, but it does reveal exactly what that rule was built upon, and every king in this hall now understands that truth as clearly as I do. The hall remains tense, divided between those who have already committed their support to Elena and those still hesitant to abandon old alliances entirely. But the balance has shifted permanently, undeniably, in a direction Draven never anticipated when he ordered his guards to drag her barefoot through those doors. Whatever authority the Ashford family once held over this summit has fractured beyond simple repair, and every king present understands that the world they walked into this hall believing they controlled no longer exists in quite the same shape. Draven stands alone near his throne, the space around him growing wider by the second, as guards and lower-ranked wolves who once answered to his family step quietly away, unwilling to be associated any longer with the collapse unfolding in front of the entire summit. He looks around the hall, searching for some remaining ally, some voice still willing to defend him, but finds only silence and averted eyes. My father built this territory from nothing, he says, his voice rising with a desperation that no longer carries any real authority. I will not be discarded because a woman I was engaged to happens to carry an old bloodline no one has proven fully understands its own history. The chamber proved it, Edmund Hollis says quietly, though his words carry weight enough to silence the room once more. I watched the seal recognize her. I have spent decades studying the old records, and I know exactly what I witnessed tonight. Corwin Ashford, standing beside his son, finally speaks again, his voice carrying the careful calculation of a man attempting to salvage whatever remains of his family's standing. Draven acted rashly. I will not defend the manner in which tonight unfolded, but the Ashford territory has stood as a respected power among this summit for 3 generations, and I would ask this hall to consider the full weight of that history before deciding our fate based on a single evening's events. Rowan Vale studies him for a long moment before responding. No one here suggests dismantling your territory, Corwin, but your son publicly humiliated a descendant of the first bloodline in front of every ruling king in the land, and did so with the clear intention of destroying her standing entirely, based on assumptions he never bothered to verify. That is not a mistake easily excused by 3 generations of reputation. Draven's composure finally breaks entirely. He steps toward Elena, his expression twisted with a mixture of fear and lingering anger, though the guards nearest him tense visibly, ready to intervene should he attempt anything reckless. You think this changes who you really are, he says, his voice low and bitter. You are still the same girl who arrived at my family's estate with nothing. A bloodline does not erase that. You are right, Elena says calmly, refusing to let his words land the way he intends them to. It does not erase where I came from. It only proves that where I came from was never something to be ashamed of, no matter how hard your family worked to convince me otherwise. Something in her steady response seems to finally break whatever remaining resolve Draven had been clinging to. He looks around the hall one final time, taking in the empty spaces where his own household's guards once stood, the lowered eyes of kings who once treated him as an equal, the quiet, unmistakable shift of an entire summit's loyalty, moving decisively away from him. "Escort him out," Corwin says finally, his voice heavy with the weight of a decision he clearly never imagined having to make. It is, perhaps, the only move left available to salvage even a fraction of his family's standing, distancing the Ashford territory publicly from his son's actions before the damage becomes entirely irreversible. Draven turns toward his father, disbelief written plainly across his face. "You would side against your own son, in front of all of them?" "I would preserve what remains of this family's future," Corwin says quietly, though the words clearly cost him something significant to speak aloud. "You have done enough damage for one evening." Two guards, wolves who served the Ashford household for years, step forward hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable with the task now assigned to them, but unwilling to defy a direct order from the territory's ruling alpha. They flank Draven on either side, and though he does not resist outright, his shoulders slump with the unmistakable posture of a man watching every ambition he ever held collapse in the span of a single evening. As he is led toward the grand entrance, past rows of kings who watched him orchestrate Elena's humiliation only an hour earlier, no one moves to stop the procession, and no one offers him a single word of comfort. The doors of the grand hall, the same doors through which Elena was dragged barefoot at the beginning of the night, close quietly behind him, leaving the hall in a silence that feels entirely different from the mocking quiet that greeted her arrival. Corwin remains standing near the empty throne meant for his son, his expression heavy with the weight of everything the evening has cost his family. He turns finally toward Elena, and though pride clearly still colors his tone, there is something closer to genuine regret beneath it now. "I will not pretend tonight has been anything but a disaster for my territory," he says, "but I recognize what has been proven here, and I will not compound my son's mistakes by continuing to deny it. Whatever standing the Ashford territory retains after tonight, it will not include further disrespect toward your bloodline." Elena studies him for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. She has learned, over years spent in his household, that Corwin Ashford rarely acts out of anything but calculated self-interest, and she does not mistake his sudden concession for genuine remorse. But she recognizes, too, that pressing the matter further tonight would accomplish little beyond prolonging a confrontation that has already reshaped the entire summit's balance of power. "I ask nothing further from your territory tonight," she says. "What happens between us going forward will depend entirely on how your family conducts itself from this point forward." Corwin nods once, understanding the boundary she has drawn, before retreating quietly to his seat, leaving the empty throne beside him as a visible reminder of everything the evening has cost his family. The hall settles into a strange, uncertain quiet, 300 kings watching Elena, with expressions ranging from awe to lingering uncertainty, waiting to understand what comes next, now that the immediate crisis has passed. Kian steps close beside her once more, his presence steady and reassuring after the exhausting weight of the evening's events. "You handled that with more grace than most rulers twice your age," he says quietly. "I did not want revenge," Elena says, her voice tired now that the immediate tension has finally begun to ease. "I only wanted the truth to stand on its own, without anyone left able to deny it." "It stands," Kian confirms, glancing around the hall at the assembled kings, many of whom are already beginning to whisper amongst themselves about what this unprecedented evening means for the future balance of power across every territory represented tonight. "And it will keep standing, long after tonight becomes a story told at every future summit for generations to come." Elena allows herself, finally, a small measure of relief, though she understands the night is not yet fully finished. The hall remains full of kings, uncertain how to proceed, alliances shaken loose from generations of careful arrangement, and a bloodline believed extinct for 1,000 years, now standing undeniably alive at the center of it all. Whatever comes next, she understands, will require more than a single dramatic evening to fully settle. But for the first time in her entire life, she faces that uncertain future without fear of hiding what she truly is. With Draven gone from the hall, the atmosphere shifts once more, settling into something quieter, more contemplative, as though every king present understands that whatever happens in the next few minutes will define how this summit is remembered for generations. Elena remains standing at the center of the marble floor, and though exhaustion pulls heavily at her limbs, she does not allow it to show in her posture. Rowan Vale steps forward once again, his expression thoughtful as he addresses the hall. We have witnessed something tonight that none of us anticipated when we arrived at this summit. A bloodline believed lost for 1,000 years, proven beyond doubt, in front of every ruling king in this land. The question remains, however, what this means practically for the future. It means, Edmund Hollis says, stepping forward to stand beside Rowan, that the old order this summit has operated under for generations must be reconsidered. The first bloodline was never meant to rule through conquest, as the histories in that chamber made clear tonight. It was meant to unite territories long fractured by competition and fear. A murmur moves through the crowd, some kings clearly uneasy at the suggestion of such a fundamental shift, others visibly intrigued by the possibility of an alliance built on something more stable than the shifting, often violent negotiations that have defined relationships between territories for as long as any of them can remember. Elena listens carefully, understanding that whatever she says next will shape the direction this conversation takes for years to come. She thinks again of her mother's warnings, of the careful lessons in caution that kept her alive long enough to reach this moment, and she understands now, more clearly than ever, that those lessons were never meant to keep her hidden forever. They were meant to keep her alive until she was ready for exactly this. I do not ask any territory to surrender its independence, she says, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. I have spent my entire life watching what happens when power is used to strip people of their own choices. I have no interest in repeating that pattern, regardless of what bloodline I carry. Then what do you propose? Rowan asks, genuine curiosity coloring his tone. Elena considers the question carefully before answering. A council, she says finally. Not one built on fear or forced loyalty, but one where territories choose to participate because they trust the process is fair. I ask only that this summit recognize what happened here tonight, and that the treatment I received upon arrival never be repeated against anyone, regardless of their rank or history. The proposal draws thoughtful silence rather than immediate agreement, several kings clearly weighing the implications carefully before committing to anything. Kian, standing close beside her, nods slowly, recognizing the wisdom in her approach, even as he understands the difficulty of convincing 300 proud rulers to willingly cede any measure of their traditional authority. The Northern Wastes will participate, he says firmly, breaking the silence first. Not out of obligation, but because I have watched, over many years of ruling my own territory, how quickly power curdles into cruelty when no one is willing to hold it accountable. Rowan follows soon after, then Edmund, then a slow but steady procession of kings, who had already committed their support earlier in the evening. William Hart and the other younger alphas add their voices as well, eager to be part of something that promises a different future than the one their fathers and grandfathers built through decades of careful, often ruthless negotiation. Not every king commits immediately. Several remain cautious, unwilling to bind their territories to an arrangement whose full implications remain uncertain. But even among the hesitant, the earlier hostility has faded entirely, replaced by careful curiosity rather than outright dismissal. Corwin Ashford, watching from his seat near the empty throne that once belonged to his son, finally speaks again, his voice measured and careful. The Ashford territory will consider the proposal fully, he says. I will not commit hastily to something this significant, but I will not stand in opposition to it either, not after everything this hall has witnessed tonight. It is not full endorsement, but Elena understands it for what it is, a cautious step toward reconciliation from a man whose family has caused her more harm than almost anyone else in this hall. She accepts it without pressing further, understanding that trust rebuilt too quickly rarely holds any real strength. As the hall begins to settle into quieter discussions, smaller groups of kings breaking off to debate the implications of the evening amongst themselves, a young servant approaches Elena hesitantly, carrying a pair of simple shoes and a clean cloak, offered with visible nervousness at approaching someone whose standing has shifted so dramatically within a single hour. For your feet, the young woman says quietly. Her name, Elena later learns, is Charlotte, one of the household staff who had shown Elena small kindnesses over the years, despite the risk of doing so, under Draven's watchful cruelty. I am sorry for what happened to you tonight. I wanted to help sooner, but I did not know how. Elena accepts the shoes gratefully, the simple gesture carrying more warmth than anything spoken by the assembled kings throughout the entire evening. You helped exactly when it mattered, she says softly. That is more than most people manage tonight. As she slips the shoes onto her raw, bruised feet, finally offering some relief after hours of walking barefoot across cold marble and rough stone, Kian watches with quiet approval, understanding that the small gesture matters as much to Elena as any grand declaration made by the assembled kings throughout the evening. You have earned quite a following tonight, he says, a faint note of warmth entering his usually guarded tone. Not through force, but through simply refusing to disappear when everyone in this hall expected you to. Elena allows herself a small, tired smile, the first genuine expression of anything close to lightness she has felt since being dragged through those doors hours earlier. I spent my whole life being told that surviving quietly was the safest path, she says. Tonight, I learned that sometimes surviving loudly is the only way forward. Around them, the hall continues to hum with quiet discussion, 300 kings, slowly beginning to reckon with a future none of them anticipated when they arrived at this summit. While at the center of it all, a woman once dragged in barefoot to be humiliated now stands as the unlikely foundation for whatever comes next. Weeks pass following that first extraordinary night, and word of what happened within the Grand Hall spreads far beyond the summit itself, carried by every king who witnessed it firsthand back to their own territories, growing with each retelling until the story becomes something closer to legend across the land. Elena Grant, once an unknown ward of the Ashford household, becomes a name spoken with a mixture of awe and careful respect in halls she has never even visited. She does not rush the council. Rowan and Edmund helped her propose that first night. Instead, she spends the following weeks traveling between territories with Kian, meeting with kings and their advisors individually, listening far more than she speaks, learning the specific concerns and histories of each region before asking anyone to commit to something as significant as shared governance. Her mother's lessons in patience, once used only to keep her hidden, now serve her in an entirely different way, allowing her to build something lasting rather than something merely dramatic. The Northern Wastes, under Kian's steady leadership, becomes the first territory to formally join the new council, its harsh reputation softening slightly as word spreads of an alpha king willing to kneel before proven truth rather than cling to inherited pride. The Eastern Hollows follows soon after, Rowan Vale's careful diplomacy, smoothing the path for several smaller territories, still uncertain about the changes unfolding across the land. The Ashford territory takes longer to commit, exactly as Elena expected. Corwin remains cautious, still navigating the political fallout from his son's public disgrace, though he sends careful, measured correspondence to Elena throughout the following months, testing the waters of reconciliation without fully committing to anything binding. Draven himself disappears from public gatherings entirely, his name rarely spoken except as a cautionary example whispered among younger alphas learning the dangers of cruelty built on unchecked assumption. Elena does not seek him out, nor does she dwell on what became of him beyond occasional reports that reach her through the growing network of territories now willing to share information openly, rather than guard it jealously as they once did. She has spent enough of her life shaped by his presence. She has no interest in allowing him to define the years still ahead of her. Instead, she focuses her energy on the council itself, watching it grow slowly but steadily as more territories witness the tangible benefits of shared governance, built on trust rather than fear. Disputes that once might have led to open conflict between neighboring territories now find resolution through careful negotiation, mediated by a council whose authority rests not on inherited power, but on a bloodline whose entire history proves the danger of power wielded without accountability. On a quiet evening, nearly a year after that first extraordinary night, Elena stands on a wide stone balcony, overlooking the courtyard of the newly established council hall, built through the combined resources of a dozen territories now formally committed to the new order. Below her, representatives from across the land move through the courtyard, exchanging quiet conversation, a scene that would have seemed impossible only 12 months earlier. Kian joins her on the balcony, his presence as steady now as it was that first night in the Grand Hall, though something in his manner has softened considerably over the months they have spent working alongside one another. The council grows faster than even Rowan predicted, he says, leaning against the stone railing beside her. 3 more territories requested formal admission just this week. Growth built slowly tends to hold longer than growth forced quickly, Elena says, echoing a lesson she learned not from her mother, but from the long months of careful negotiation that followed that first dramatic evening. I would rather have territories join because they trust the process than because they fear the alternative. Kian studies her for a moment, something warm and genuine settling into his usually guarded expression. Your mother would be proud of what you have built here, he says quietly. Not through the mark you carry, but through everything you chose to do with it, once the choice finally belonged to you. Elena glances down at the faint mark still visible beneath the collar of her simple dress, a far cry from the torn gown she wore the night everything changed. It no longer feels like a burden to be hidden, nor a weapon to be wielded against those who wronged her. It feels, instead, like exactly what her mother always hoped it might eventually become, a reminder that strength does not require cruelty, and that true leadership is measured not by how many kneel out of fear, but by how many choose, freely, to stand together. She looks out over the courtyard below, at territories once divided by generations of careful, often hostile negotiation, now working alongside one another, toward something steadier and more lasting than anything the old order ever managed to build. She thinks of the small cabin at the edge of the northern woods, where she spent her childhood learning caution above all else, and she thinks, too, of the cold marble floor where she once knelt barefoot, surrounded by laughter meant to break her. Neither moment defines her fully anymore. Instead, she carries both forward as reminders, one teaching her the value of patience, the other teaching her exactly what she was capable of once patience finally gave way to purpose. The girl who was dragged in barefoot to be humiliated has become, through nothing more dramatic than her own quiet refusal to disappear, the steady foundation upon which 300 Alpha Kings now choose, freely and without coercion, to build something better than the world they inherited. Below the balcony, the courtyard hums with quiet conversation, territories once separated by fear and ambition, now finding common ground beneath a bloodline that asks for nothing more than the same fairness it was once denied. And as the evening settles into a soft, golden dusk, Elena Grant stands watching the future she chose to build, no longer hidden, no longer afraid, exactly where her mother always hoped she would eventually stand.